The United States of America is at a crossroads. American supremacy is being challenged economically, militarily, and politically. And the person many people are blaming is the president who promised them change. Hello and welcome to The Cafe. I'm Mehdi Hassan, and this week we're in Washington, D.C., the seat of American power. It's been 4 years since hope officially arrived in the White House in the form of Barack Obama. But his failure to turn the US economy around or significantly cut unemployment has led to disillusionment and even despair. The rise of the right-wing Tea Party and the street protests of the left-wing Occupy movement are a reminder of how polarized the US has become. Obama has had his successes. He ended the war in Iraq, and in the words of his vice president, Joe Biden, thanks to him, Osama bin Laden is dead and General Motors is alive.
God bless the United States of America.
But is this enough to secure him re-election for a second term? And whatever the result in November, is the job of the US president now simply to manage American decline? Let's find out inside the cafe. Joining us in the cafe today are Amy Goodman, an award-winning journalist and host of the independent radio program Democracy Now! Goodman is critical of the Obama administration and is worried about the erosion of democracy in the US. Ford O'Connell is a longtime Republican strategist and activist who served on John McCain's 2008 presidential campaign. O'Connell believes President Obama has not done enough to create jobs, thinks the bailout of the auto industry has failed, and wants the US to take a much more hawkish stance on Iran. Karen FINNEY is a former advisor to both Bill and Hillary Clinton and a strong supporter of the Obama administration. She was the Democratic National Committee's first African-American communications director. Clarence Page is a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Chicago Tribune and one of America's best-known political pundits. Although Page is a supporter of Obama, he believes the president has not done enough to live up to the hope and change message of 4 years ago. Wajahat Ali is a Muslim-American lawyer and playwright of Pakistani descent. He wrote the first major play about Muslims living in a post-9/11 United States and is also the co-author of a damning report on the Islamophobia industry. Bruce Fein is a constitutional lawyer and proud libertarian. He served as an advisor to Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul and as Associate Deputy Attorney General under President Ronald Reagan. He's an outspoken critic of US drone strikes. Thanks all of you for joining me here in the cafe in Washington, D.C. I want to kick off with a question for all of you, and that is, will President Obama win re-election in November? And does he deserve to win re-election? Karen.
He should be re-elected, I think, because he has ably managed the challenges that this country is facing. And I think the challenges that we're facing are not just economic, but they're social and they're cultural. And I think he has very adeptly helped us through that transition. And I think this is a really important moment in our country's history.
Bruce?
I don't think he should win. I think he's been a disaster carrying forth the Bush-Cheney global foreign policy of the United States, using predator drones to commit assassinations, keeping Guantanamo Bay open. Domestically, we now have a national debt over $16 trillion, and for the next 4 to 8 years, it looks like $1 trillion deficit in perpetuity. Nonetheless, I still think he'll win because Romney's even more inept than he is.
Wajahat, Bruce isn't a fan, are you?
I think he'll squeak by just because Romney's about as exciting as cardboard, but cardboard with good hair. No offense to cardboard. And I think, look, does he deserve to win? It's a good question. I think we're in a sorry state of affairs where the American public are given only two viable choices to choose from. And in this particular situation, I think President Obama is a much more attractive choice for the nation than President hopeful Romney. So I think he's going to squeak by. I think most people, most Americans, there's a sense of disgust, apathy, anger towards both Republicans and Democrats, with the realization that neither of these parties are really taking their best interests to heart.
Clarence, you're a veteran observer of politics in this country.
That's a nice way of saying I'm old. Been around a long time, but
I'm saying you're wise, Clarence.
Thank you.
How close is it going to be?
I don't know if he's going to win or not, but I think that he is ahead enough in the states that count where it's his race to lose. Whether he deserves to win, I think the big issue is the economy. It's fairly well agreed he hasn't had that much of a chance to really implement his program, or he spent a couple of years learning the lay of the land, which every new president does. And the question is, do you want to go with the guy who's got some experience and let him finish the job, whatever it is he's trying to do, or you want to go with the one who hasn't even started yet and hasn't been very clear about what he wants to do? And in that sense, I think Obama has the edge. But the voters always have a way of fooling us pundits, so let's see.
Amy.
I really don't have any idea who's going to win in November. I think if the election were held today, Obama would win, although the amount of money that's being poured into the election, over $1 billion for the presidential candidates, who knows? I'm more interested in the grassroots movements in this country, this moment, this window of opportunity when candidates have to listen from the local to the national level. What they are saying, because that's what's going to determine the future. There is a force more powerful than the most powerful person on earth in the White House, and that is the power of people, as we saw last year with Occupy, as we saw with the Arab Spring, and I think that's what's most interesting to watch right now.
And last but certainly not least, Ford.
As of now, I think that President Obama is going to win re-election. Americans are really frustrated with the blame game that's going on between President Obama and Mitt Romney. And if Mitt Romney can talk about the future and sort of put forth a bold, clear vision for the future with respect to the economy and jobs and cutting the federal deficit, he could very well win, but it is going to be a very tight election.
Does the president deserve to be re-elected in your view?
Absolutely not, because he is not interested in boosting the American economy. He believes that taxing the wealthy and basically putting in government infrastructure is the way back to prosperity, and that's not.
Let's talk about Barack Obama, the candidate you're backing. Where did it all go wrong for him? He came in with such hope, so much expectation, and whether you may be a supporter or not, but you have to admit, this is not where you wanted to be 4 years in.
Of course. Look, I think there were any number of things. Number one, I think expectations were too high, and I think people got definitely caught up in their own emotion, but I think people really wanted to change. At the same time, Republicans in Congress from day one said, we are going to obstruct this guy. We're going to make him a one-term president. So the other thing I haven't heard from Mitt Romney, which I would love to hear, is how does he think he would be any more successful or effective with a Congress that is hell-bent on making sure you don't accomplish anything?
Well, let me ask Amy.
I think what happened on Election Day in 2008, that moment, the world heaved a sigh of relief. For so long, so many people felt they were hitting their head against a brick wall. Now that wall had become a door. And the question is, it was open a crack. Would it be kicked open or slammed shut? That's not up to that one person in the Oval Office.
Dare I ask Bruce and Ford, why is it that Republicans seem to hate Obama so much? Not just oppose him or criticize him. There seems to be a loathing.
Hate is a strong word. I think what they don't like is his policies, because I think that they see his
Nothing to do with him personally?
I don't think so. I really don't think so. I do think that they do not like his policies, particularly how he wants to look at the world, is big government and government promoting everything. In a lot of ways, if we look at it from a foreign policy perspective, he has done advance the Bush-Cheney, war on terrorism, to a point that a lot of people, I think, found in disbelief.
Karen.
I think some of the people who oppose President Obama, it has to do with policy, it has to do with very real things. There is a sector of this country, we would not be still talking about whether or not he was born in this country. We wouldn't have federal judges sending emails about his white mother saying to him, you should be lucky you don't bark. If it wasn't true that for some people there is a visceral, let me finish. Everywhere. There is a visceral reaction to this man, and this idea that who is this man? In the same way I saw this happen with Bill Clinton, who thinks he can take over the establishment, he gets to tell us what to do. There is an element of that going on in this country, and I think part of what we're seeing in this election, this frame of economic fairness and prosperity and Do we get there on our own? Do we get there together? Does everybody do their part? I mean, that is what this conversation is about.
When you speak about hate, yeah, there is some hate out there. There's hate on the right and hate on the left. Right now, the right is energized. Just like 4 years ago, the left was energized and the right was apathetic. As soon as Obama got elected, there were a lot of people in this country who woke up that next morning and said, we elected who?
Yeah,
Who's in the White House? And suddenly there was this shock, a culture shock, because certain people have an idea in their head of what a president ought to look like, and Obama doesn't look like that.
So it's a race
and
issue
so
for you.
it's not just race, it's also that Obama is a socialist. So we can't trust Obama. It speaks to all those things.
I don't think it's just policy. I think for many it's policy. But for several people in America, there's a segment where Barack Hussein Obama, who he is, what he comes from, it represents an America, like he was saying, they woke up and they said, oh, this is not my America. They are taking away my America. The reality right now is what people don't know is that there's a record number of hate groups in America, 1,200. The rise in the hate groups is due to three major groups. Number one, anti-government groups, white supremacist groups, and anti-immigrant groups. The reasons they said is number one, the horrible economic conditions. Number two, changing racial dynamics in America. This is now a minority-majority country. Number three, the election of Barack Hussein Obama. So unfortunately, the right wing, and especially the Republican Party, has unfortunately, instead of expelling this toxic element, has brought them in, and I think it's
I don't think this is confined to the Republican Party.
And moreover,
I don't say it's their fault.
There's a double standard here. Wait, there's a double standard here.
They haven't expelled them.
Let me tell you the double standard. When the New York Times published the piece that Obama's officials encouraged, showing there are assassination plots right in the Oval Office, there's no outside review, there's no due process, the people who get targeted are not accused of any crime. These are all the things that if it was George W. Bush and Cheney...
Obama's assassination policy.
The kill list. The kill list. Problem. If that article was written about what Bush and Cheney did, the left would be calling...
That's a fair point. But deal with Wajahat's point. Deal with Wajahat's point about the rise of the far-right groups, the constant reference to the middle name, the birthers. I mean, those of us who didn't live in America, we look at the debate and we think, really?
I agree. Those are despicable, and I totally deplore them. But it's on the other side as well. It's a degradation of the
There are birthers in the Democratic Party as well.
Only just on the right side.
I agree. Look,
I'm
saying, what I'm saying is the Republican Party, especially the right wing, unfortunately, instead of expelling this element, I don't say it defines all of them. Instead of expelling this element, they've embraced it, all right? I'll take him at his word. He says he's Christian. I'll take him at his word. 17% of Americans think Obama is a Muslim. As a Muslim, I can tell you, if he is a Muslim, he's the worst Muslim of all time. Don't worry. The dude eats pork openly, all right? I haven't seen a Muslim celebrate Easter and say Jesus as a savior, but that's a problem, 17%.
And we do see on the left, by the way, let me add one thing. We do see on the left an element of dislike of the Mormon faith with Mitt Romney.
But we're talking about the way it's manifested itself publicly, and I think...
What's more important, how they pull the lever or what we're hearing out there?
You know what? What's really important, if you're a person of color in this country and you see the country becoming more racially charged, it's frightening.
I do not think it's getting more racially charged because we did elect an African-American president. But I do think that these elements are out there.
Bruce, 1 second. Amy and then Bruce.
And yet here you have President Obama presiding over more deportations of immigrants than all presidents for going way back, certainly well more than President Bush. I mean, in 50 years, you then have this remarkable situation of, and this is with the local New York police, where I come from, working with the Central Intelligence Agency, targeting Muslims at a level we haven't seen before, from New York to New Jersey, throughout the Northeast, at Yale University. These undercover agents are going, and they are looking at where Muslims pray. They're looking at where Muslims do business. They're following students on weekends outdoors and documenting how many times they pray. There was one report the New York Police Department had that said these students are so extreme that they pray 4 times a day. So we were interviewing one of those students who was named in the report. He said, this undercover agent was so stupid that they didn't understand we pray 5 times a day. But this is happening under the Obama administration.
I grew up in the civil rights movement. I despise anything but colorblind approach. And I say this preface because there is a racism on the other side, too. There are men who say, I will vote for Barack Obama just because he's black, period. and it doesn't make any difference. They just want a black man in there.
There's no moral equivalency there. I mean,
I'm not saying there are. It's still bad.
Well, yeah, but how
racism is racism.
I mean, you're one of the country's most distinguished legal experts. What about jury selection? The courts have already decided that race is a factor in jury selection, that's valid. So, you know, there's a lot of reasons for bringing race into account without being racist.
No, but they say it's unconstitutional for race being a factor.
Part of what we're talking about and part of what has happened in this country, maybe it's because of the election of Barack Obama. I personally also think it just happens to be we are a majority-minority country. We are changing. The way we live our lives is dramatically different. Our economy is different, and I think we're all trying to adjust to that. But you do have elements, I think, within our political system. We have a very dysfunctional system here in Washington for a lot of reasons, not the least of which, when you have, you know, the Republican Speaker of the House so terrified and so paralyzed by, 24 or so Tea Partiers, that you have to have the Senate Minority Leader, who is a Republican, chastise him publicly to get things done.
Let me ask Ford a question. Karen raised a very interesting issue. As an outsider, I look at the American political system, and it doesn't look like it works. It looks pretty dysfunctional, as the phrase used. Who is to blame for that dysfunctionality?
But why do you say it's dysfunctional? Just because the Congress doesn't agree on something? Why, by that definition?
Do you not think the world's richest economy came close to defaulting on its debts last year?
But
you don't think that the rest of the world wasn't too impressed with that?
That doesn't mean because Congress is logjam.
So you think American system's working fine? In your view?
No, it's not. The question isn't whether it's working fine. I think that's huge. And the American government is working terribly, but not because there's these log jams. I think the whole conception of how you make an economy boom, not military industrial complexes, not trillion-dollar TARP programs, not trillion-dollar stimuluses where you give it out to cylinders and everybody else. That is the problem, and both sides are guilty.
If you go to the Hill and you talk with people, they all sort of agree. Not much is going to happen between now and the election. Not because it shouldn't, not because it's not a good idea.
No, because both parties want to know what the makeup of the next Congress is.
Do you think both parties are to blame for this?
I absolutely do, but I will say the reason why nothing's happening is because both parties want to know what the makeup of the next Congress is so they can figure out where they have to bargain.
We often hear this phrase that the Republican Party is now the party of no. It just says no to everything. It won't vote for a tax rise. It won't vote for a raising in the debt ceiling. It is basically set its head against doing anything that opposes the Democrats and Obama.
And I think both parties are doing that. It's not like the Democratic Party is actually bargaining really on the tax increase either. The House said no tax increase.
You don't think Obama tried to reach out at all?
No, I don't. I think both parties are guilty of this, and part of the rules is the situation where the Republicans control the House, the Democrats control the Senate, and basically the Democrats have the president. They want to know what the future is going to look like before they start horse trading.
There's loyalty to party before loyalty to country right now. That seems to be the consensus of Americans, and I think, sorry to the Republicans, it seems that they have made a dead-set effort to stymie anything that the Obama administration wants to do. Whether it's good or bad, it seems that we're just going to be no, no, no. Look at the debt ceiling crisis. They just hijacked that.
Yeah, I think
most Americans are like, you know what? We're going to go for our party politics instead of bettering the nation.
But the Democrats have 2/3 of the government. That's what everybody likes to say, is that it's 50-50. It's not 50-50. It's only 50-50.
That's so disingenuous, because given the way that the government works, it's not working. It's not that we control 2/3 of the government and can just sign a piece of paper and get anything done you want.
No,
you can still
but that is part of the rules. We've known these rules.
The problem is not the debt. It is the death of the middle class. What we are seeing in this country right now, it is absolutely terrifying. Mitt Romney would just do it faster, but Barack Obama is well on this path. I mean, we are now seeing the latest figures. 1 in 6 Americans live in poverty right now, and the numbers are only escalating. In communities of color, it is far higher. When we hear about unemployment in double digits, in communities of color for young black men, we're talking about 50% of young black men not having jobs. It is a terrifying situation. When we were seeing these crises, it was expected that President Obama would take the country in a different direction. Instead, he surrounded himself by the same bankers that have robbed this country and deserve to be in jail.
Let me ask Karen to respond to that. You worked in the Clinton White House. He led the party to the right, and now Obama's leading the party to the right.
I don't agree with everything that either one of them has done and the way they're trying to do it necessarily. The problem is we have to, as citizens of this country, raise the stakes on our politicians and hold them accountable. The only way we get change is when there is a political consequence for not doing the things that you said you were going to do.
Let's put this in perspective. Do you know that Americans spend more money each year on bottled water than they're going to do in this federal election? I mean, is that really? No, but I think I really think that is an important thing in this.
Doesn't that just mean you spend a lot of money on bottled water?
That's probably true, too. And I'm just saying we need more transparency. There's no question about it. But as long as a political contribution is free speech, guess what? It's the way it is.
I mean, explain that to a foreigner. How is money speech? Who wants to make that? How do you express it? How does it work? Explain to our view. Bruce.
The simplest answer is that's what the Supreme Court said in Buckley versus Vallejo in 1974.
Do you agree with that view?
Obviously, if you prohibit somebody from spending any money to do something, to promote something, for example, publish a newspaper, you can enter the newspaper industry, but you can't spend any money on it.
Bruce, only rich people can spend money. What do the poor people do? How do they get their voices out?
They vote in the ballot box. And if you had to run a TV show, a broadcast station, or the media and said, you know what, you can't spend any money.
No one is saying you can't spend any money.
But
I mean, in the United States, one of the famous signs during the Occupy movement was, I'll believe a corporation is a person when Texas executes one. Right now, more and more corporations are being treated as people. The Supreme Court decision to look at that is such a catastrophe for politics in this country, as Citizens United from 2010, that has unleashed a level of corporate, unsourced money in politics, and that's very important. This isn't about each individual spending money, and this is corporations whose names we don't know, who are pouring money.
I think we all agree there needs to be more transparency. There is no question about that.
I think it's important for for audiences to understand that the way our system works is that you have the political parties and the campaigns, and they are able to raise a certain amount of money, each individual who donates up to a certain amount. Then you've got the PACs and the super PACs, which are able to take larger sums of money. It is less regulated. There is less transparency. And so one person can write a $20 million check.
Let me ask you a question to link this money subject. Where did the Tea Party come from? Because some people say it's a grassroots organization campaigning for liberty. Others say it's a corporate front. Who's right?
The Tea Party is the American right wing by a different name. There are some that are fiscal teas, and there are some that are tea-evangelists. They've always been around. Some are libertarians who believe in small government. Others are social conservatives who also believe in small government, think that's the Lord's way. They got mad when Obama won, while the left got more complacent.
I think they started off as grassroots, and then you have these larger forces like the Koch brothers. So it's now the Tea Party on Coke. The Koch brothers, who are billionaire brothers who are now bankrolling this massive movement against any kind of regulation in government and to defeat President Obama.
Let me ask one last question before we go to a break, and that is to all of you. Is America more polarized now than it was 4 years ago? Is it a more divided society?
Yes.
I think so.
I absolutely think so, and I think that a lot of that goes to the economy.
As people slip into poverty, it becomes a very scary place.
Economically, politically, socially, yes.
After the break, we're going to ask whether Romney wins or Obama wins. Is the job of the next American president simply to manage American decline? Join us after the break. Welcome back to the cafe here in Washington, D.C. I want to kick off part two by asking you all a question. We often hear American politicians say that this is the greatest country in the world, which from an outside perspective, forgive me, doesn't always seem to be the case. But I just want to check with all of you, do you believe America is the greatest country in the world? And if not,
I absolutely believe it's the greatest country in the world. Because of the freedoms we have, because this is honestly a place where we can sit and exchange ideas, and frankly, we pride ourselves on free enterprise when the government isn't overreaching. That said, though, we have a tendency to potentially lose this position as the greatest country on earth if we don't make wholesale changes to our economy, and if we don't start touting education as our best national security going forward. We're really lagging, in those areas, and it could lead to our demise.
You know, for many, this is the greatest country on earth that provides so much opportunity. But for others, it is a place where you don't have access to health care, to education. We have the largest per capita prison population. We have thousands of people on death row. It is a very frightening place.
Well, I think that we are the greatest country in the world because I'm a good American. But you know what? We used to be better. And it depends on how you look at it. We rank something like 17th or 7th in literacy among the industrialized countries. We rank way down on health care. We rank down on college opportunity. When I was a young man, I could work in the steel mill in my hometown, get enough money during the summer to pay tuition in the winter, and get the great education I got at Ohio University. Tuition there is 10 times what it was when I went to school. The steel mill's gone. The industrial belt is devastated right now. And on upward mobility, we are way behind a bunch of other industrial countries right now, and we're slipping. And that's why, we got the greatest potential in the world. We always have. We're a country of opportunity. But you know what? Opportunity is shrinking in America, and that upsets me greatly for the sake of my own kid and other Americans.
Wajahat, you were great, but you're not so great anymore.
We used to be better. We still could be better. We need to get better. But the American dream seems to be exactly that now for many people, especially my generation, a dream that will never be realized, cannot be realized. And the dream has not exploded, it's evaporated. It's collapsed on itself. And specifically when it comes to 18 to 24-year-olds, we're looking at 54% employment, the lowest ever, right? The lowest ever. We're looking at, I think, 50 million Americans, 8 million of which are kids without health insurance. The disparity between rich and poor is its highest ever. Poverty is increasing, yet we have time and budget to incarcerate 2 million people, right? And at the same time, we have this immigration problem, which instead of treating it with humanity and compassion, it's always treated it with national security parameters, 12 to 13 undocumented individuals in this country. And so we have potential, it's unrealized, and unless we start caring about people instead of corporations and lobbyists and partisan bickering, right? I think we're going to go on a really slippery slope. I mean, it's frightening right now.
With all due respect, I think the question is adolescent. Like boasting we're number one or something at a football game. That's not what the country is about. If we ask what really makes a country great, is what John Quincy Adams said in his July 4th, 1821 address. The glory of a republic is liberty, the rule of law, the making a free opportunity irrespective of one's heritage, gender, background, or anything else. That is what the country is about. That's where we've totally lost our way. And John Quincy Adams said at that time, he was Secretary of State and later became president, that we reject as a country that our glory is force, it's domination, it's going abroad in search of monsters to destroy. And now that's basically what the country is about. All the viewers out there who are outside the United States, that's how they see us. 1,000 military bases abroad, anything moves, we get in there, we intervene, we tell you what you ought to do and you ought to respect us. It is an arrogance that in some respects reflects, well, we're number one. That is precisely the kind of juvenile attitude that, well, everyone else who's not an echo of us is somehow inferior, that causes other countries to resent us.
Karen.
We are the greatest country, but I think we have to reimagine what the American dream is, and I think part of the period that we're in is a period of transition from what the American dream was and what it should be and what it can be. And I think as a country, we have to be open enough to reimagine what that is. I think I worry when I hear people talk about certain things coming back or going back to how it was. I mean, there are certainly things in the way that it was. Women couldn't vote, blacks couldn't vote. I don't want to go back there. But I do want to see a thriving middle class because that has been the hallmark of this country. I think that, unfortunately for people like me, I think we're in a period where it's going to be messy and ugly, and we have these problems for a while.
You say it's the greatest country right now. You believe you're living in the greatest country in the world right now. How do you respond to kind of Amy gave some of those statistics, Clarence gave some of the statistics. You're not number one in most of the, you're number one in all the bad things. Obesity, number of people in prison, etc.
Right.
You're not number one in infrastructure or mathematics or scientific, you're not number one in those areas. Healthcare, life expectancy.
But I think what makes America a great country is that we have the tools in this country to be better.
Well, why don't other countries have that? Why? That's such an arrogant statement.
You know what?
In Great Britain, they don't have the tools to do that?
We do.
They may, but from my perspective, living in this country, I look at President Obama, and I'll tell you, I've been to Europe, where there was a conversation after President Obama was elected about, is a Barack Obama possible in France, in Germany, in all these other places? I look at Barack Obama's story, it is a purely American story to me, not just because he's African American, but because he was raised by a single mother.
Although the same Europeans now look at America and think, look at all those birthers and look at all those people who think
Sure.
Obama is a Muslim, secret Muslim. And
Absolutely, but at the same time, again, I look at his story, and I think that that is a story of this country that makes it a great country.
I think one of the problems that we're having right now in terms of getting back to that point of opportunity is the fact that America right now is not adapting to globalization. And I think that that's hurting us all around. And I think going back saying, hey, we want to go back to the policies of Bill Clinton or FDR, that's not going to cut it. Okay, there is a whole global economy. You talk about people coming across the border. Well, guess what? The money's going across the border. Everything is now interconnected.
Well,
and I think that right now, all the policy prescriptions being put out there are not about taking into account the global economy. They're all harking back to this point. I mean, the point is the idea.
Clarence, let me ask you this question. Is the job of the next president, whether it's Barack Obama or Mitt Romney, simply to manage American decline?
Well, you know, this is why Romney's talking about standing straighter and walking taller. Americans want to hear an optimistic message. We're an optimistic people. We want to do more than just manage decline. We want to grow. We want to have breakthroughs.
It's fine whether you want it. Can it be done?
We have our ups and downs, you know. This is a very simple statement, but it's true.
Amy and then Bruce.
Look at today's technology, computers, automobiles, et cetera, et cetera. Look at Obama himself, you know. We look at the great breakthroughs. Every so often we really do walk tall because we are ahead, and we can be ahead again.
As long as Americans are just looking to one person, we're going to go nowhere. It's all about people making a difference.
I think this idea that the only earmark of greatness is economic strength, I think is totally misconceived. And go back, greatness, liberty, due process, the rule of law, making certain that those who are born with handicaps have fair opportunity. That's what makes the country great, whether or not the GNP is high or low. And this reminds me of Calvin Coolidge, who is not noted as a famous American president, said, the business of America is business. No, that's not what the country was created on. As John Quincy Adams, the business of America is liberty and a fair opportunity
And you're a
for all.
pessimist when it comes to liberty. You don't think things are going to get better on that front?
Things are deteriorating. They're getting worse every single
Karen,
day.
let me say, Karen, two Republicans are here and they're saying that liberty's got worse in the last 4 years and civil liberties have been more abused under your presidency.
But what I love about that, the irony of that, is that it's the Republicans who want to tell me what to do with my body, who want to deny me the access to birth control. No. It's absolutely the right point. If we're going to talk about liberty, then let's be consistent. Then let's say if gay people want to marry, who cares? Then we should say if my doctor and I want to make a decision about taking birth control or not taking birth control.
Who's stopping you?
Well, the
Who's
Republicans certainly don't think that we should.
Wait, nobody's stopping you. You're making an
That's
issue that's not
right.
an issue.
Yeah, and I certainly agree with that. You want to have same-sex marriage, and the states do that?
Nobody's stopping
You're
you.
being disingenuous about what the Republicans do. How many times have we? How many times have the
Totally
Republicans?
ignoring the fact that you have authorized, under Mr. Obama, a big brother police state. The surveillance drones
You know what?
multiplying.
That may be your issue, but for me, I'm talking about. I know you don't have to actually care about birth control or what happens to your body or the ability to have an abortion, but I do.
Karen,
so you should respect that.
Karen, Roe versus Wade.
Just deal with Bruce's point. Bruce says Americans are living under a big brother police state. That's under Barack Obama. You said at the start that people put too much hope and there was too much expectation. But I seem to remember him in 2008 saying he would end all of these things. He would end Guantanamo rendition, civil liberties. And yet he's now a president who sits down with, I believe, a kill list every Tuesday morning and decides which people he's going to kill with no due process, no overview. How do you justify that?
The truth is, whether or not you agree with this, from the polling that I've seen, a majority of Americans say, and unless Americans get outraged and do something about it in another direction, they would give up some of their personal liberty and freedom if they believe it keeps them safer. Whether or not you agree with that is not my point. My point is...
Do you agree with it?
I don't know, because I don't think it's a black and white cut.
Let me say one thing about the Obama.
I don't think it's a straightforward issue. I don't think it's a straightforward issue.
People would rather feel safe than be free. Great quotation by H.L. Mencken. And those freedoms come at the expense of usually minorities. Marginalized communities, especially right now when we're talking about President Obama's record with civil liberties, it's been shameful. I mean, there was kind of a mandate that President Obama would come in and set back these civil liberties abuses that we experienced under President Bush. But what we've seen is that it's extended, it's increased. And of course, so people want to feel safe, but that feeling of safety comes at the expense of freedoms of many minorities in this country. African Americans know about this.
I agree with that.
Mexican immigrants know about this. Gays and lesbians.
You were a supporter of President Bush, so you must be a supporter of what President Obama's doing. It's a continuation of Bush.
Beyond comprehension. I think one thing that the Obama presidency's missed is when they were in the cheap seats on the outside, governing this country looked easy. And then they recognized how hard it really is and where you have to make those trade-offs. And I think that that's really what's hindered him, is the idea of it was a lot better than actually, the execution of it.
Everybody here is right on the rational level and by the letter of the law and the Constitution. So why is there not a great American uprising of anger over this? This is what intrigues me. And I think emotionally, Americans are a bit confused right now over the nature of privacy. While we're complaining about government intruding on our privacy, private people and corporations and individual Facebook and Twitter users whatever are intruding. Young people especially now have a whole different view of privacy. And as far as the drones go, I happen to be a Vietnam-era veteran, drafted, and when I look at the cost-benefit analysis about going after, say, bin Laden or some other terrorist in Pakistan or Yemen or Afghanistan or Sudan, and sending in ground troops versus one drone on a video game kind of machine, which is what we have reduced murder to now, I can see why there's not a great debate.
Now, I think Clarence has got it totally misconceived in trying to suggest that the use of Predator drones is sort of a good trade-off. How about Mr. Alaki's 16-year-old U.S. citizen who is vaporized, who is totally vaporized? And we are killing people without any idea about whether they're guilty or not. What?
What's your alternative?
The alternative is not to be there at all, to build defenses where we are defending the United States. No.
You want to send in the posse, right? Send in ground troops to go get it.
No, I'm not sending. I'm against sending the ground troops there at all. No way.
Let him operate.
We have defenses here. We have defenses here.
Hold on. Well, you say hold on, forward. It's an out there view. It's an out there view in America. The rest of the world is pretty much outraged over drone attacks.
What I want to say is, I agree with you. There is a certain trade-off out there. What really chaps a lot of people, really, is the fact that this president, the one thing that he really campaigned on was getting rid of drones. Closing Gitmo. Actually, he did.
It was actually getting out of Iraq.
Did he not criticize the previous administration for doing that? And all he did was ramp it up. And
he said there's smart wars and stupid wars, didn't he?
Yes, but we all know that. And we know that that's the fact of how this works. I'm not arguing that. What I'm trying to say is one of the top things that he used against the previous administration is what they were doing in this realm. And all he's done is increase it significantly.
It's a very terrifying thing, the idea that we will now engage in drone wars around the world. The idea that people, if they don't lose members of their family, who will even be paying attention to this? Do you know who it is who is killed? President Obama has made the decision in places like Pakistan that all young males are considered militants unless proven innocent later.
After the fact.
After they're killed. It's a major problem, and if we are going to use this as a model, what happens when someone sends a drone over our country? This is happening every other day in places like Pakistan and Afghanistan. But I also want to talk about the militarization of the police here at home. We have a law in the United States called the Posse Comitatus Act that says we don't think it's healthy for soldiers to be marching through the streets of the United States. The way the authorities have gotten around this is they have militarized the police. Since 9/11, billions of dollars have been poured into local police departments. They have drones, they have tanks, and where they have deployed this mainly is against peaceful protesters. For example, the Occupy movement.
It's easy to frighten people. It's easy to make them want to yield liberty by magnifying danger a millionfold. It was what Hermann Goering, the Nazi, said to the Reichstag in 1934. Easy to do. It is the duty, the imperative duty of leaders like Obama and others, I'm not excusing Bush or Cheney, to try to dissipate that ease of magnifying the danger so that liberty is sacrificed at the drop of a hat and we have a police state. And that is exactly what Barack Obama has not done, and it was what he suggested he would do when he was elected.
Well, briefly.
I want to talk about the deliberate exploitation of fear. I mean, specifically recently we saw Michelle Bachmann and her cohorts, 4 elected officials, just casually say, oh yeah, without any evidence or facts, because facts are not her strong suit, that the government of the United States of America has been infiltrated by radical Islam. And specifically, she mentioned Huma Abedin, who is an aide of Secretary Clinton, respected across both aisles, and it's led to death threats against her. I wish more leaders, especially from both sides, but especially, again, I know this is not most Republicans, But the Republican Party has been infiltrated by this radical right Islamophobia
John
network.
McCain did stand up
John
and
McCain did.
denounce
I agree with you. John
Number of them
McCain
have.
did. Boehner did. This was really
But
it's frightening because they're using fear to divide Americans.
Michelle Bachmann didn't just casually say that. She wrote a 16-page letter to the State Department and asked for an investigation into how it is that someone like Huma could be, so it was a witch hunt, but it was an abuse of her power and her authority, and I was glad to see John McCain and others come forward, because that kind of intolerance, part of the reason that we were able to get to that point is because we didn't stop it sooner. And we let it feed itself much sooner, and I think since 9/11 we've been on a very treacherous path, and I agree with both of what you're saying in terms of, if we're going to look at liberties and freedom, we have to rethink the whole thing in this country, and it's not just about what we do abroad, but what we're doing right here at home.
I want to ask Ford a question. You joined with Bruce very eloquently saying earlier about how Obama has gone beyond Bush and Cheney. Well, let's throw it forward. Mitt Romney wins in November. Is he going to turn the clock back? Are we going to get Americans going to get these civil liberties back that Obama's taken away in your view?
I don't think that the drones abroad are going to be ceasing anytime soon.
See, this is
No,
why
that is a fair point.
Why
Now, boy,
this election is like Iran-Iraq war. Both sides should lose, precisely for
And you say that as a
reason.
Republican?
For the
Wait,
Republican,
let me go.
Mitt Romney and Obama both should
But
lose
we are
because they are
talking about
destroying
domestic
the glory
freedom.
of the United States, which historically has been liberty, rule of law, fair chance for everybody.
And that is,
They
those
don't
are
believe
domestic
that.
rule of law. That's the one thing that
In
has been there.
international
And I
rule of
hope,
law,
and I
too.
do hope that we turn this into less of a police state. We have gone too far on the police state.
Is
side.
Romney going to do that as well?
I hope he does. I don't know if he's going to do it.
That
this
suggests
country
that's
is
what he wants.
suffering.
I just said I don't know if he's
This
going to do
country
that.
is suffering not from the bipartisan divide, but from the bipartisan consensus,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
exactly right.
Because the Democrats joined with the Republicans in authorizing the war in Iraq,
Yeah,
and they joined with the Republicans
The
in
NDAA on the detention
on all of
without
these
any
various
kind of trial.
issues, from drone strikes to, that is the problem.
Well, let
is
me
that
ask,
there isn't,
let me ask a
as there is
question
in
that
other
a
parts
lot of people around the
more
world.
parties.
Let me ask a question a lot of people around the world are wondering. I'll ask Karen first. A lot of people are wondering what is going to happen with Iran. That's what is a huge worry. That's going to be the next war. Jeffrey Goldberg, the journalist, wrote an article recently approvingly saying that actually Obama is more likely to take military action against Iran than Mitt Romney. And in his view, that's a good thing. I'm wondering whether you agree with him.
I look at Iran as sort of one of the 3 or 4 sort of outliers in this election that something could happen and that could change the outcome of the election, because I think we don't know what can happen. I think it is, I think certainly on the Democratic side, I think people are hoping nothing happens until we get to the election, because I don't think anybody wants to have to deal with it.
Politicizing Iran.
No, I think that, I think, because look, at the end of the day, depending upon what they do, it's going to be a choice between a lot of very horrible options that I don't think anybody wants to have to take. That's my honest answer.
I think neither side wants to see Iran gain nuclear weapons, and I think that that's the bottom line.
Let me ask one last question to you all before we wrap up today. 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 2 or 3 presidents from now, will America still be the top dog in the world? Ford?
I think so. The question, though, is what we're going to do in the next 10 to 15 years to make that happen. We really need some wholesale changes in this country while still trying to maintain our individual freedoms as much as possible. And I think one of the ways we have to do it is touting education going forward as national security for the U.S.
Amy?
I think the most important question to ask is how well organized are people going to be to demand what they want? The elections have been kidnapped by the large moneyed interests in the United States. So who becomes the president of the United States? There is really not an enormous amount of difference. I'm not saying what's in their heart, but in what they're actually able to carry out. What really matters in our country, in the United States, and in countries around the world, is what people decide to demand at the very bottom level. I think we're going to see a huge change because people are going to start to flex their muscle out of necessity.
Terence?
I like to think that America will follow England, France, Spain in becoming comfortable former empires. But right now, the military-industrial complex you referred to earlier is much too strong. There's much too much money and productivity, jobs, et cetera, in having a bloated military that's way more than we need, and saying, well, the world needs us to protect them. Why? Again, a unilateral decision. Now, we need to work more on sharing power. I hope that's going to happen.
I'd rather us have, instead of being a top dog, a healthy, safe, secure dog that's loyal to its masters, which are the people, and American values. And I think if we pursue the top dog status by keeping in line with these policies, we'll achieve like a Pyrrhic victory. We'll be a wounded dog with the negative costs, I think, being the quality of life for Americans, and also deteriorating relations with our neighbors abroad.
Well, again, I think it's not a sensible question to ask whether we'll still be number one. In my judgment, we go down 10 years, we will be worse on the earmarks of what I consider greatness: liberty, rule of law, fair opportunity, getting the government out of the business of using authority to favor one part of the community against another. We clearly, in my judgment, are on an arc that's downward. And in some sense, I disagree with Amy. The analysis, I think, of the wrong is correct, but leadership matters. I don't believe by spontaneous combustion you end up with great enlightened civilizations in society. And what is, to me, a cause of maybe not despair, but disappointment is I see no leadership on the forefront that's going to inspire the grassroots, if you will, to do these things that are very important. And in that sense, Obama's election in his first term is the greatest despair to me, because this guy has brains. He is intelligent, he's thoughtful. It's not like George W., who is sort of subliterate, to be a little bit unkind. And despite that, whenever it came to a moral judgment, he flinched. He didn't take the leadership role and try to change the values of the United States. He did what you said: unless there's a march outside the White House fence, why should I care? That's not leadership.
Karen.
Obviously, I disagree with that. I think I'm less interested in whether or not we're top dog and more interested in sort of where we are and will we in 10 years have navigated what I see as a massive shift and transformation of this country, both culturally, socially, ethnically, our economy, and have we marshaled the tools to do that? And I think I kind of go back to where we started in terms of, yes, I said that I think that a lot was put on President Obama, some fair, some not fair. But I think the reality is, are we going to do the work? And yes, we need leadership, but I also think, we need leadership not just in the White House and not just in government. We need it in the private sector. We need it in our non-governmental organizations. And I think the question is, are we going to be able to do that? And where do we end up in the next 10 years?
Well, we're going to have to leave it there on a big question there to leave it there on. Thank you all for joining me here in the cafe. This debate will continue online. Thanks for watching us here in Washington, D.C.